Mao Mao actually smuggled erotic books and illustrations into the palace. The second season of Medicinal Girl has finally arrived. But Mao Mao never expected that the erotic illustrations she had the madam send to the palace would be confiscated by Jinshi. Today, Jinshi was inspecting Gyokuyuhi's palace, looking everywhere but couldn't find Mao Mao. Knowing his intentions, Gyokuyuhi told him Mao Mao was at the medical office. At that moment, Mao Mao was busy distilling essential oils, using a distillation device found during cleaning, with materials left over from making blue roses. Upon seeing Jinshi, Mao Mao asked him what he needed. Jinshi, ever so tsundere, was immediately annoyed. "Do I need a reason to see you?" He questioned why Mao Mao wasn't doing this in the Jade Palace. Mao Mao whispered to him that some essential oils could cause miscarriage, though in small amounts they were harmless. However, Mao Mao didn't want unrelated people to know about Gyokuyuhi's pregnancy. Jinshi then noticed the distillation on the stove. Mao Mao explained it was for distilling alcohol, which after several distillations would produce high-purity alcohol for disinfection, keeping the environment clean. While demonstrating, someone delivered a package to Mao Mao, which made her immediately anxious. To avoid arousing Jinshi's suspicion, she claimed it contained underwear, piquing Jinshi's interest even more. Kojun also became curious about what kind of underwear needed two men to carry. Eventually, the contents were exposed. Mao Mao had brought these items into the palace with good intentions. The palace maids, mostly virgins, could be unprepared if chosen by the emperor, which could lead to serious problems. So, Mao Mao bought these items for their education. Moreover, she initially ordered these books because the emperor enjoyed them. This time, to expand sales, she bought extra, but Jinshi happened to catch her. Kojun was seriously examining the books, impressed by their exquisite craftsmanship. Besides text, there were illustrations, printed not from wood blocks, but from metal engravings, a rare quality that Mao Mao naturally wanted to promote. After hearing this, Jinshi couldn't help but flip through them, and Kojun quietly suggested he could keep a few if he liked. Jinshi, the stubborn man, refused, saying he could let Mao Mao off the hook but needed her to disclose the bookstore, claiming he was just interested in the printing technology. Mao Mao gave a knowing look, but Kojun, citing the explicit content, demanded to review them first. Thus, Mao Mao's carefully selected erotic books were all taken away. A few days later, Mao Mao went to play with Quran, hearing that a novel was circulating among the servant maids. Although these maids were illiterate, those who could read would narrate it to others, and the novel had become popular in the harem. When Mao Mao returned to the Jade Palace, she found the emperor had distributed it to all the consorts. The upper class usually considered such popular novels vulgar. What was the emperor's intention? Mao Mao also noticed the seal on the book was from the shop she had told Jinshi about. Clearly, Jinshi had suggested this to the emperor. She wished she had asked for a commission. Unable to discern Jinshi's intentions, Mao Mao continued her work, while her sisters had already finished the novel. Aaron felt it was a pity that only a few maids enjoyed such good material, but it was problematic to lend the emperor's gift to others. Mao Mao suggested she could copy the content for other maids to read, praising Aaron's neat handwriting. Mao Mao also began to understand Jinshi's intentions. With books circulating in the harem, more people would want to learn to read. When she served as Jinshi's maid, he had once asked how to increase literacy among the maids. It turned out Jinshi had made it happen. Even Quran asked Mao Mao to teach her to read, as the maid who had been narrating the novels had lost her voice, leaving them with a written copy. Many maids were illiterate, so Mao Mao offered to read to Quran, but Quran felt she should take the opportunity to learn herself. Thus, Mao Mao began teaching her, starting with her name and some medicinal herbs. Quran questioned if these words were commonly used. Mao Mao immediately erased them, starting over with everyday language. Princess Linli can now run and jump. The emperor has also allowed her to leave the palace. Besides 2 guards, Gyokuyuhi hopes Mao Mao and Hanyan can accompany her, teaching Linli about flowers and wildlife. Who knows where this child might marry in the future? Mao Mao understands Gyokuyuhi's intentions. Although Princess Linli is still young, she may be involved in a political marriage in 10 years. Learning about medicine and poisons could be beneficial. Thus, Linli stepped out of the Jade Palace with everyone's company, bathed in various gazes. She cannot understand them now, but one day the princess will discern the malice or envy hidden in those looks. Linley was attracted by a bed of flowers. Mao Mao told her they were called primroses. The next second, the princess ran towards an alley, drawn by a sound. Mao Mao squeezed in to investigate and found a kitten. The wary kitten dashed out, and Mao Mao chased after it but missed. Unexpectedly, a strange palace maid caught the kitten and handed it to Mao Mao before running off. Because the kitten was dirty, Mao Mao didn't let the princess touch it and took it back to the medical office first. The incompetent Dr. Nguyen immediately made a nest for the kitten and placed a hot water bottle nearby for warmth. Mao Mao asked him to get some animal milk and intestines from the cafeteria, since the texture of intestines resembles a mother cat's nipples. She then began to wipe the kitten's body and used oil to kill the fleas. Soon, Nguyen brought back goat milk, and watching the kitten suckle melted their hearts. That evening, the emperor visited the Jade Palace and, learning they had found a kitten, allowed it to stay in the palace and specifically asked Mao Mao to take care of it. Once the kitten regained some energy, Mao Mao gave it a bath. After some time, the cat could eat shredded chicken and started to defecate on its own. To prevent it from scratching the princess, Mao Mao carefully trimmed the kitten's nails. Jinshi, hearing that Mao Mao was recently a litter cleaner, brought dried small fish to console her. He checked and saw it was a female kitten. Mao Mao remarked, "Good thing it doesn't need to be neutered," which instantly hit Jinshi's sore spot. She quickly pulled out some snacks to entertain Lord Jinshi. Both Kojun and Nguyen showed potential as cat slaves, while Jinshi couldn't understand the appeal. Mao Mao felt the same, but cat lovers say they like cats because they can't tell what cats are thinking, and they never tire of watching them, gradually wanting to touch them. Cats usually ignore people, only showing affection when they want food. Jinshi couldn't help but think of Mao Mao. Realizing he himself was a cat slave, he began affectionately nuzzling the kitten's belly. Mao Mao looked on with disdain, while Jinshi also understood the benefits of cats. Later, the emperor even appointed the kitten as an official for catching bandits, as it was good at catching rats that stole medicinal herbs, and named it Mao Mao. Meanwhile, a caravan was heading towards the palace. The day for the caravan's arrival is approaching again. This caravan is an advance party of foreign dignitaries, large in scale and staying longer than usual. Jinshi has instructed Kojun to pay close attention to these important diplomatic guests. As the weather warms, the palace harem has started updating their wardrobes. Hanyan is assigning tasks to everyone. Mao Mao and the others are responsible for organizing the clothing, setting aside outdated garments for tailors to refurbish. These are then sent as gifts to Gyoku Yuhi's homeland, with Mao Mao adding moth-repellent herbs for protection. During this time, Iren informs them that new maids are expected soon, as Gyoku Yuhi is pregnant again, and more help will be needed, especially since Lulan has over 50 maids and servants, while favored Gyoku Yuhi has only 5, which is hardly presentable. After storing the old clothes, it is naturally time to acquire new ones, taking advantage of the caravan's visit to the palace for a major shopping spree. On the other hand, Rifahi has listed items to purchase and sent her maid to buy them. However, after descending the stairs, Shin sees a letter from the clinic and her expression darkens immediately. The palace remains a place of intrigue, but the caravan has arrived on schedule, staying for 5 days. The first few days are primarily for the ladies and their maids. Koran, a servant, can hardly get close. After spending some time in the harem, Mao Mao finds this place increasingly peculiar. So many permanent residents, yet no shops, and only a quack for a doctor, making disease spread easily. Fortunately, sanitation is well managed with sewage directly discharged into a large river, thanks to the Queen introducing Western water management technology. If sanitation is maintained, diseases can be prevented. However, severe illness results in being sent home. On the last day, Koran, who can finally take a break, hopes Mao Mao will join her for a stroll. Mao Mao naturally agrees. Upon returning, they discover how much everyone has bought. Even the typically frugal Gyoku Yuhi seems to have splurged. Most of the garments feature wide sleeves and skirts that tie below the bust, styles touted by merchants as fashionable. Mao Mao speculates about the timing, as outside the palace, Gyoku Yuhi's pregnancy isn't public knowledge yet. Merchants usually bring styles their clients prefer. Gyoku Yuhi likes fitted waist designs, but with her growing belly, she'll opt for looser fits. If the merchants brought these styles intentionally, their motives might be suspect. Out of caution, Mao Mao suggests asking the merchants about fitted waist designs tomorrow. Gyokuyuhi immediately understands Mao Mao's hint. On the final day, Mao Mao and Karan go shopping together. Mao Mao buys Karan 2 new red hair ties, moving Karan to tears of joy. They visit a stall selling tea and spices, ready to bargain hard as merchants typically offer discounts on the last day. When Mao Mao spots jasmine tea, so does another maid, a familiar face who helped with a cat before. Mao Mao buys 3 jasmine teas, and they all go to see the cats, brewing the tea which blossoms beautifully when hot water is poured, both delightful to watch and taste. The quack doctor brought mooncakes as snacks for the tea. Shisui saw the caravan for the first time and curiously asked if it was always as lively as a festival. The quack explained that this time it was because foreign envoys were expected soon. Shisui then mentioned a strange smell recently from the north side, which has always been quite dirty and possibly had a clogged sewer. Shisui ventured to the north side because it was a good spot to catch many insects, and she even drew them, surprisingly lifelike. When Mao Mao heard there were large spiders there, her eyes lit up, and she immediately planned to visit with Shisui next time. Several days had passed since the caravan left. Recently, essential oils imported from the west became popular in the harem. While Mao Mao was hanging clothes for Karan, she smelled rose oil and considered selling the rose water she had made before. Suddenly, she remembered that strong scents like rose essential oil could negatively affect pregnant women. She immediately checked their clothes in the Jade Palace and indeed detected the rose scent. She smelled the clothes from other palaces and found the same scent everywhere, which alarmed her. She rushed to the Crystal Palace, which was susceptible to trends, and without regard, started sniffing the maids' clothes as they changed, which seemed bizarre to them. Shin then complained about Mao Mao to Jinshi. Mao Mao, unrepentant, promised to ask for permission next time before sniffing. She began to document the spices and essential oils she detected on the maids, and showed it to Jinshi, noting that all were harmful to pregnant women. Besides essential oils, the caravan also sold spices and tea, like the jasmine that Mao Mao bought, which could cause uterine contractions. Other spices could also potentially induce miscarriages. This incident resembled a past event where items with little-known side effects appeared in the harem, similar to what poisoned Princess Linli and killed Rafahi's child. Though Mao Mao couldn't be certain, these items had toxic side effects but weren't necessarily seen as poison due to their safe use in small quantities. Nonetheless, a warning to the consort seemed prudent. Gyokuyuhi immediately had her maids investigate thoroughly. The palace remained fraught with danger. The court lady Suire, who had once escaped from a feigned death, was still missing. The attempted assassination during the Zhongxi incident likely involved many, and the extent of the mastermind's reach remained unknown. Mao Mao was taught by her foster father never to speculate without evidence. If she weren't a personal maid to the consorts, she would earn very little and wouldn't have been interested in the caravan. If the essential oils hadn't become fashionable, she might not have noticed. But it could also be that this time just happened to have many such items. What was coincidental and what was inevitable? Mao Mao couldn't figure it out. Just as she prepared to sip the brewed jasmine tea, Jinshi appeared without Kojun. He asked Mao Mao to make him a cup of that jasmine tea, though it was the last one. Pouring more hot water only made it a second brew, but Jinshi didn't mind. While making new tea, Mao Mao explained the benefits of jasmine tea, which are often overlooked due to its side effects. She mentioned it could even treat male infertility, which made Jinshi's face fall. Realizing she had gone too far, she ended up offending Jinshi, who then left. After he left, Kojun immediately reported a significant event to him. Consort Shizuka had died. News of Princess Shizuka's death quickly spread to the Jade Palace, rumored to be from food poisoning. Gyokuyuhi had heard that Shizuka had been bedridden for the past year. During this time, Jinshi visited with Kojun, and Mao Mao learned from a quack doctor that a palace maid named Tao had disappeared. Despite being close to completing her service and her upcoming marriage to a promising civil officer, this excellent maid vanished suddenly, which Mao Mao noted but chose not to intervene given the nature of the harem. Upon her return, Mao Mao saw Jinshi engaging warmly with Gyokuyuhi. As soon as he saw her, Jinshi took Mao Mao aside to discuss the emperor's recent initiative of distributing novels for the consort's entertainment. which were then read by the maids to other palace maids, sparking a frenzy of literacy among them. Jinshi proposed setting up a calligraphy class in the harem, which Mao Mao surprisingly praised as a good idea, shocking both Jinshi and Kojun since Mao Mao seldom gave direct compliments. Mao Mao recommended establishing the calligraphy class in the dilapidated North Side Square, suggesting it be presented as vocational training to attract more participants, and occasionally offering snacks as incentives. Jinshi took her practical suggestions to heart. He then inquired if she knew about mushrooms, which she did, given their use in cuisine and medicine. With it being mushroom season, there were frequent cases of food poisoning from palace maids, picking them indiscriminately. Jinshi asked her to remove any potentially poisonous mushrooms and inform him about their types. During this task, all other duties at the Jade Palace, except for testing poisons, were suspended for her. Mao Mao wondered why Jinshi hadn't discussed this in front of Gyokuyuhi, suspecting he might have an ulterior motive, but she was quite willing to undertake this task. She headed to the secluded north side, the likely spot for maids to secretly forage. Sure enough, many mushrooms were growing there. Mao Mao was excited, but then smelled a pungent odor, recalling Shisui's mention of a strange smell previously. She speculated that the smell was from sewage overflow, which fertilized the mushrooms. After a day of foraging, she returned dirty to the Jade Palace with a full basket of mushrooms, including some suitable for medicinal use, which she stored in the medical office. She then quickly went to help Gyokuyuhi test for poisons, and noticed that both she and Hanyan wore black cords, signaling another consort's death. On the way, Hanyan informed her that Princess Shizuka had passed away. Shizuka had been reclusive due to illness for a year, rumored to have died from food poisoning, never favored by the emperor, and was known for her difficult personality and jealousy towards other consorts and maids, even being violent towards those of lower status. During that time, Gyokuyuhi, who was pregnant with a princess, was poisoned. When Jinshi confronted the suspect, they showed no fear and challenged him to present evidence. Without evidence, the matter was dropped, but the chaos within Shizuka's quarters was well known. The news of the maid's bullying came out after her death, which reassured Hanyan, who was loyally devoted to Gyokuyuhi. Mao Mao suddenly connected this to the task Jinshi had given her, suspecting that someone in the Jade Palace might have poisoned Princess Shizuka with poisonous mushrooms. Of course, Mao Mao didn't believe Gyokuyuhi would do such a thing, as she had more sophisticated means at her disposal as a favored consort. None of the other maids seemed capable of secretly administering poison. Could Jinshi suspect her? That might explain why he had her search for poisonous mushrooms and observe her reaction. While taking a flower from one of Shizuka's maids, Mao Mao noticed scars on the maid's palm. Shizuka's body was tightly covered, revealing nothing. At that moment, another consort burst in, pulling back the cloth to reveal Shizuka's face covered in scars and patchy hair, symptoms identical to hers. The crazed consort cursed Shizuka for bringing it upon herself. Seeing these marks, Mao Mao understood what Jinshi was looking for. The next day, Mao Mao returned to the north side to search for mushrooms. The consort who had disrupted the funeral, a lower-ranked consort once favored by the emperor, had abruptly fallen ill with a mysterious disease 2 years ago. The emperor had kept her in the harem but never visited again. Her outburst at Shizuka's funeral was likely due to her suspicion that her illness was caused by Shizuka. Mao Mao finally found the culprit of the consort's strange illness, the poisonous mushrooms. She immediately called Jinshi and Kojun to the medical office, instructing them to take precautions before revealing the securely wrapped mushrooms. This type of mushroom was rare but extremely dangerous, capable of killing with just a small piece and even toxic to touch. Mao Mao stopped Jinshi from getting too close and showed him her own scar from encountering the mushroom while gathering herbs with her father. However, the important thing was the symptoms on Shizuka's body, which were almost certainly caused by this mushroom. Jinshi sighed, revealing that when the lower-ranked consort fell ill 2 years ago, they suspected poisoning, and Shizuka was rumored to be the poisoner, though no evidence was found. A year later, Shizuka exhibited the same symptoms and deteriorated rapidly. Jinshi visited her monthly but could never converse with her. Given her pride, it seemed likely she had taken her own life, unable to bear her condition, according to the maid's testimonies. Mao Mao immediately spotted a flaw in this theory. If Shizuka had died from eating the poisonous mushrooms, she should have shown symptoms like abdominal pain and paralysis, and inflammation in the mouth, not spreading to the face. Moreover, the facial decay looked fresh, as if directly applied with the mushrooms, yet Shizuka's hands were clean. Remembering the scars on the maid's hand who gave her the flower, Mao Mao formed a theory. She borrowed several strong eunuchs from Jinshi, who trusted her investigative skills, knowing she only needed evidence when she had that look. Mao Mao conducted further investigations and took Kojun and the eunuchs to a forest in the north, where they found a densely mushroom-covered lawn. Digging there, they unearthed a body adorned with Shizuka's emblem, confirming it was indeed her, dead for about a year, matching the timeline of her illness. This suggested that Shizuka had been dead for some time, and the Shizuka seen later was an imposter. Combining this with what she heard from the quack about Tao, the missing maid who resembled Shizuka closely and was similar in height and build, Mao Mao speculated that the tyrannical Shizuka, unable to bear another woman resembling her receiving suitor's affection, often vented her frustrations on Tao. Eventually, Tao, unable to tolerate it any further, fought back, leading to Shizuka's death. The maids, either out of self-preservation or sympathy for Tao, let her impersonate Shizuka. However, with her marriage approaching, Tao could no longer maintain the deception. These were Mao Mao's deductions, so she didn't share them with Jinshi. He was merely curious about how she knew where the body was. Mao Mao enthusiastically showed him the mushrooms she had collected, explaining that those nearby often grew near animal corpses or waste and had a distinctive rotting smell. Surprised it was caused by a corpse, Mao Mao had been observing the mushrooms there happily. Realizing this might be inappropriate, she faced Jinshi's questions about her plans for the mushrooms. Despite her explanations and pleas, Kojun ended up confiscating all but one that fell to the ground. Yet, Mao Mao remained curious about the nature and potential effects of mushrooms grown on a corpse. Recently, 2 stunning beauties arrived at the imperial palace as foreign envoys. They brought with them full-length mirrors, crafted differently from those made domestically. These mirrors reflected images with exceptional clarity. Mao Mao, curious, took a closer look and thought that if these could be mass-produced domestically, they could potentially make a fortune. Unfortunately, glass products were generally available only in Western countries. She wondered what important matters the envoys wished to discuss, bringing such valuable gifts from overseas. Soon after, Kojun approached Mao Mao, sharing a dilemma about a friend troubled by a pair of sisters. These sisters, very similar in appearance and daughters of a wealthy family, were overprotected by their parents as they grew older. They were confined to their home and monitored by maids. However, one sympathetic maid occasionally took them out secretly. When discovered, she was dismissed. A new maid was hired, and male servants were placed outside to keep watch. The sisters spent their days embroidering inside. Suddenly one day, the older sister claimed the younger sister was pregnant with a divine child. Mao Mao's first thought was that the maid had secretly let them out again. However, Kojun said the new maid rarely interacted with the sisters. Hanyan speculated whether it involved the male servant watching them, but he was not permitted near their room. Mao Mao was stumped, but from a medical perspective, there is a phenomenon known as pseudocyesis. She recalled young courtesans at the brothel claiming to be pregnant with their lovers' children, showing all physical signs of pregnancy but not actually being pregnant. However, Kojun clearly used this situation as a metaphor for something else. He just wanted to know if it was possible for the younger sister to have sneaked out. He then produced a layout of the room. The sisters lived in a separate building on the north side, connected to the main house by a west corridor, the only exit. The east and south sides each had a window, watched by male servants stationed at the third and first floors of the residence, making it nearly impossible to see inside. However, the sisters spent most of their time near the windows, so any absence would be obvious. Mao Mao felt Kojun was withholding key information. Both windows were in the same room, but the sisters' bedrooms were separate. She suddenly asked if this separate building was intended for guests. Kojun was surprised she guessed this. Seeing Mao Mao hesitant to speak further, Kojun pulled out something Jinshi had given her as a substitute for Bezor, since its demand was high: bear bile. Upon receiving the bear bile, Mao Mao hesitantly shared her thoughts. She placed 2 almonds by the windows to represent the sisters, and then placed a mirror in front of the east window. The almond at the south window reflected in the mirror, creating the illusion of an additional almond. If the sisters had used a large mirror in a similar way, the observer, being far away and the sisters looking very similar, might not notice any abnormalities. allowing one sister to escape. The differences in embroidery could also be explained. Mao Mao drew a face on paper that looked happy when viewed correctly, but angry when turned upside down. Thus, the embroidery could also be an optical illusion. Mao Mao thought about the full-length mirror the envoys brought. If such a mirror were used, it could easily cause visual errors from a distance. She remembered her father, who had studied in the West, mentioning that embroidery was a hobby among upper-class women. Could the sisters have some connection to the envoys? Of course, that was not for Mao Mao to question. She was more concerned about what she could do with the bear bile. On the other side, Jinshi encountered trouble again and came to Mao Mao for help, asking if she had heard of a legendary beauty whose tears turned into pearls. Mao Mao almost wanted to suggest Jinshi look in the mirror, as he himself was quite a beauty. The rumor, however, came from an envoy who had often heard about this woman from her grandfather when she was young. She was described as a celestial beauty, whose dance would sprinkle blessings, and whose tears would turn into pearls, apparently a courtesan from the flower district. But considering her age, this moon fairy would now be an old woman. Thinking through the information, Mao Mao realized this was none other than the old madam from the green-blue house. However, the envoy was not interested in seeing the madam as she was now. Jinshi had already hosted a banquet with beautiful women, but the envoy scoffed at it. Mao Mao suggested letting the beautiful women accompany the envoy to sleep, but Jinshi then revealed the envoy was a woman. This made sense to Mao Mao. No wonder the envoy sought Jinshi, whose beauty could captivate anyone. Unfortunately, the lack of suitable companions remained an issue. Curious about the envoy's importance, Mao Mao learned that she controlled crucial trade locations between the West and the North, and the trade delegation was large because they wanted to discuss new trade matters. Seeing Jinshi so troubled, Mao Mao went to the old madam to inquire further. Proudly, the madam recounted an event from over 50 years ago, shortly after the capital had relocated and there was no palace ready to host guests. The emperor used the remnants of an old site, now the north side of the inner palace, and set up a stage where the old madam and other beauties performed dances. The old madam, a top courtesan, was chosen as the lead dancer, partially because of her tall stature. The emperor valued that banquet greatly, putting much effort into preparing, even calculating the phases of the moon and clearing any obstacles. The area was near an orchard, so it was necessary to meticulously remove all larvae from the leaves to prevent insects. Unfortunately, insects still got attracted by the lights, and someone tampered with the madam's dress, smearing it with insect remains. Luckily, she covered the stains with ribbons, and nobody noticed. The madam then showed Mao Mao a painting sent by the envoy's trade delegation afterward, depicting a woman of celestial beauty. Still, Mao Mao couldn't understand why the envoy insisted on calling her a goddess, even if the old madam was beautiful back then. She took the painting back to Jinshi, and at this point, they could only start by looking for tall beauties as depicted in the painting. Mao Mao had an idea. There was already a perfect candidate right in front of them. After choosing the beauties, Mao Mao went to the old site to look for clues. Unexpectedly, she encountered Shisui, who showed her a caterpillar he had just caught. This caterpillar would metamorphose into a moth, nocturnal and luminescent under moonlight, creating an enchanting effect. Initially dismissive, Mao Mao suddenly thought of the celestial woman from the rumors. She confirmed with Shisui that these moths would mate immediately after metamorphosing and that he could differentiate between the sexes. Mao Mao became excited and rallied everyone to search for these moths, then shared her plan with Jinshi. A few days later, a banquet was held at the palace for the foreign envoys, in the same north side courtyard where the Moonlight Fairy had appeared 50 years ago. The high-ranking consorts and officials attended, but they all stayed in carriages, a strategy devised to prevent the envoys from drawing too much attention. Mao Mao hid in the bushes, observing that the two envoys looked very similar and were exceptionally beautiful, exuding a confidence in their own beauty. They pulled the curtains up high, allowing the emperor to fully appreciate their looks. The party started, but the envoys seemed disinterested. Suddenly, one of them stepped out of the carriage and walked directly to the emperor, seeking a closer conversation, and mentioned the emperor's brother. Mao Mao realized the envoys intended a marriage alliance. However, before the emperor could respond, the envoy was persuaded by her sister to return to the carriage. Mao Mao felt that the envoys likely had little interest in the Moon Fairy and were merely confirming that no one else in the world was more beautiful than them. Their gift of mirrors to the 4 high-ranking consorts was probably just a provocation. However, these were not Mao Mao's concerns. As the banquet was ending, she hurried to check on Jinxi's preparations in a nearby room. With everything ready, she blindfolded Jinxi and personally escorted him to the path the envoys would take back. As the carriage stopped, she quickly lifted the blindfold. A stunning beauty appeared before everyone, with Jinxi, dressed as a woman, dancing elegantly under the moonlight surrounded by myriad glowing lights, perfectly recreating the scene the envoy's grandfather had witnessed. The 2 haughty female envoys were stunned. After the dance, the moon fairy vanished suddenly. One envoy, disregarding her image, rushed over and shook Mao Mao, who simply pointed at the moon and spoke the name of their country's moon goddess. After the moon fairy performance concluded perfectly, it likely left a lasting impression on the envoys. The pale light points were actually the adult moths Shisui had found. The old madam had mentioned that her dress was smeared with insect remains, and some insects emit scents to attract mates. The male insects, attracted by the scent, gathered around her, making her appear as a moonlight fairy surrounded by light points. Unfortunately, only a few could witness such a beautiful scene, as such beauty could potentially destabilize a nation. Jinxi seemed quite upset. After the dance, he jumped into the river wearing his heavy costume and silently swam to the other side of the pool, creating the illusion of the moon fairy's sudden disappearance. Nonetheless, they managed to satisfy the 2 envoys. Mao Mao dutifully dried Jinxi's hair. The next day, Mao Mao met Karan in the inner palace. Karan was heading to a calligraphy class while Mao Mao found a shady spot to idle. There wasn't much work for her at the Jade Palace, and the quack doctor was likely overwhelmed due to being involved in the essential oils incident. Regarding this incident, it hadn't fully concluded yet. Jinxi still hadn't figured out who brought the oils into the palace, knowing only that each palace had purchased a large quantity. They had to dispose of the toxic part for now. The 2 envoys were the current suspects, as they seemed keen on seizing the consort's positions, but ultimately, such lack of restraint didn't match their personalities. Mao Mao couldn't help but start analyzing. There were 4 high-ranking consorts in the palace. Considering the power of their natal families, Lulan consort should be the most valued, her father having been a favored minister since the previous emperor's reign. Next was Rifahi consort, a relative of the emperor, with little ambition for competition. Rishu consort's family had risen in status only in recent generations. Unfortunately, the emperor preferred voluptuous women and had never favored her. Lastly, Gyokuyuhi consort, the emperor's favorite, came from a homeland in the west that seemed prosperous due to trade, but was actually quite barren. Gyokuyuhi consort had been the victim of 2 failed poison attempts. Although it was likely that the perpetrator who tried to poison Gyokuyuhi consort, then pregnant with a princess, was a mid-ranking consort who died in a recent mushroom poisoning incident, how did a mid-ranking consort acquire such knowledge of poisons? Mao Mao then thought of Suire, but then she wondered, what did all these matters have to do with her? A poison tester. Mao Mao tossed aside a twig and decided to find something else to do to change her mood. On her way, she encountered maids from the Crystal Palace, who all ran away at the sight of her, except for Shin, who remained dignified. She was the only maid in the Crystal Palace who hadn't used the perfumed oils, possibly just because she didn't like them. After returning to the Jade Palace, Mao Mao discovered that Iron had caught a cold. She went to make cold medicine for her. However, to avoid infecting consort Gyokuyuhi, Iron took Mao Mao to the infirmary after taking her medicine. This place was staffed by older palace maids, one of whom checked Iron and confirmed there were no serious issues, so she advised her to stay for isolation. Mao Mao was surprised. This was her first time learning about such a facility in the inner palace. The maid here seemed to have more experience than the mediocre doctors, and the strong smell of alcohol indicated continuous cleaning, making it a suitable place for recuperation. The maid took Aaron to an isolation room and urged Mao Mao to get back to work. As Mao Mao left, she took a moment to look around. On her way back, she bumped into Jinxi. Mao Mao took the opportunity to ask why he didn't convert the infirmary into a proper hospital. Unfortunately, it wasn't that simple because only males could serve as medical officers. Minor injuries were manageable, but more severe injuries had to be handled by medical officers, who were also the only ones allowed to make medicine. Mao Mao couldn't help but ask about her own situation. Jinchi said he would turn a blind eye to her activities, but he wouldn't do the same for others. He also mentioned they hoped to recruit medical officers in different ways, wishing that eunuchs could serve in these roles. Mao Mao remembered that the current emperor had banned the castration surgery for becoming a eunuch after his accession, foreseeing a future shortage of talent. Considering Jinchi's age, she guessed his surgery was probably done just before the ban, which she thought was quite unfortunate. Jinchi, unaware of Mao Mao's thoughts, reminded her before leaving not to let others know she could make medicine. Yet, that very night, the maid at the infirmary asked Aaron if the maid who accompanied her was secretly making medicine. Mao Mao's ability to treat illnesses was eventually discovered. A palace maid specifically asked Aaron to relay a message, hoping Mao Mao would come over. After Gyokuyuhi ensured there was no malice, she let Sakura take Mao Mao there. Upon close observation, Mao Mao realized this maid named Shenryu seemed to be from the western regions. She wanted Mao Mao's help in preparing medicine for a servant maid in Rifahi's Crystal Palace. This was like sending Mao Mao into a dangerous situation. However, Mao Mao didn't immediately refuse, but asked for more details. The servant often came to the laundry area, but since the arrival of a merchant caravan, she had been experiencing fatigue and low fever, followed by coughing. Shenryu advised her to rest, but since then, she hadn't returned. The head maid of the Crystal Palace, a strict woman named Shin, likely rejected the maid's request for medical treatment. It had been half a month since then, and Shenryu was really worried, so she asked for Mao Mao's help. According to Shenryu's description, an epidemic couldn't be ruled out, so Mao Mao couldn't just stand by. At that moment, she spotted a gecko in the bushes, rushed to catch it but only managed to grab its tail. Mao Mao wanted to use it to make a regenerative medicine for Jinchi, needing to research why a gecko's severed tail could regrow. In the Crystal Palace, the sick maid was locked alone in a small dark room, coughing up blood. Some kind-hearted maids wanted to visit her but were stopped by Shin. Just then, a quack doctor arrived with Mao Mao in disguise, showing Shin a letter which grudgingly allowed them entry. The doctor, feeling guilty, praised Shin as an excellent maid. Shin arrogantly mentioned that the maids of the Crystal Palace were from noble families, fully qualified to serve the emperor. Her words hinted at dissatisfaction with Rifahi, who had been educated alongside her but had become a consort while she remained a maid. While passing the courtyard, Mao Mao noticed a small hut which Shin claimed was just a storage room. Mao Mao also spotted a flower by the wall she had never seen before. No longer hiding her identity, she pointed out that Shin had applied scented oil. While Shin was distracted, the doctor rushed to the hut and found the dying maid inside. Mao Mao immediately put on a face mask, instructed the doctor to prepare hot water, and began treating the maid. Shin wasn't alarmed. She had isolated the patient fearing contagion, and after all, it was just a servant maid. Her death wouldn't matter much. But Mao Mao smelled a fragrance in the room, causing Shin to panic. However, Mao Mao had already opened a box filled with banned merchandise from the caravan, enough to make abortion drugs. This involved the safety of the consorts and concubines, so Mao Mao and the doctor immediately reported to Jinchi. After changing clothes, they faced Rifahi with Jinchi questioning Shin, who remained silent. Mao Mao noticed that she and Rifahi had similar looks. They were cousins. With such looks and family background, becoming a mid-level consort wouldn't be a problem. Finally, Shin spoke but feigned ignorance about the items in the storage room, shifting the blame to Mao Mao for rummaging through another palace's belongings without clear intentions. Moreover, since anyone could access that room and the servant maid was delirious, who could prove she hadn't placed the items there? Mao Mao was rarely angry, but she mocked Shin for her sudden thoughtfulness, pointing out that Shin had never used scented oil before. It was likely that she had only acquired the scent when she went to check on the maid's illness. Mao Mao pulled out a bottle of scented oil from the box, identical to the one on Shin, and wanted to test publicly whether its fragrance was strong enough to seep through the bamboo scent. Angered, Shin slapped Mao Mao. Finally, Rifahi could no longer watch this farce and declared she would handle the matter. If Shin truly intended to make abortion drugs, that would amount to conspiring to murder the emperor's heirs. Rifahi, touching her stomach, clearly knew whom Shin aimed to harm. She knew Shin never saw her as a consort or fit to be the mother of the country. This attitude instantly enraged Shin, who dared to strike Rifahi in front of Jinchi and others. She finally burst out, arguing that despite her superior education and manners, Everyone favored Rifahi. Mona sarcastically commented from the side that it might be because Rifahi had a bigger chest. Shin continued to rant about her qualifications to be the mother of the country. In a frenzy, she picked up the box, intending to throw it at Rifahi, but fortunately, Kojun intervened in time. Mona accused Shin of claiming to love the emperor when, in reality, she only coveted the position of the empress consort. In this regard, Rifahi was superior. Rifahi then slapped Shin, stating that such a grave mistake by a maid warranted her immediate dismissal. If a slap wasn't enough, she'd use a fist, effectively asking Jinshi to let her handle Shin's punishment. Jinshi reluctantly agreed, and Shin was eventually banned forever from entering the imperial harem, lucky to keep her life. For Shin, it was a great disgrace, and she was powerless to retaliate after being expelled. After the incident, Jinshi noticed the scratches on Mao Mao's face and gave her a silk handkerchief to wipe it. Mao Mao felt it a pity to use such fine silk. She hadn't initially realized the servant maid would be locked in a storage room. She just noticed the 2 white flowers there, which were usually red. Someone had likely chosen them specifically because the green and white combination is considered beneficial for health in feng shui. Ironically, the white powder from the fruit of these flowers could also be used to make abortion drugs, though harmless if the method is unknown. Yet, how did Shin know the scented oil could be made into abortion drugs? Was the person who told her still in the harem? Mao Mao couldn't be sure. After sending Jinshi and Kojin away, the little maid who had wanted to visit the servant girl hurried to learn from Mao Mao about her condition. She was relieved to hear that Rifahi had already paid for her medical care. The emperor, visiting the Crystal Palace that night, also heard about Mao Mao's deeds. Jinshi dreamed again of his childhood, seeing an old man coming to find him, stopped by his royal mother. Then an old woman took the old man away. Jinshi later learned the old man was his father and the old woman his grandmother. The man he had always thought was his father was actually his brother. Jinshi hoped Mao Mao would realize his true identity, yet he feared it too. During the day, Mao Mao was caught secretly listening to a teacher's lecture. The teacher was explaining the history of the nation to the palace maids, mentioning that long ago, different ethnic groups lived in the country without a ruler. A noble woman from afar came and bore the child of heaven, the first emperor. She, known for her sharp eyesight that could see on moonless nights, was later revered as the Empress Dowager. Jinshi approached Mao Mao, pleased to see over 20 maids attending the school. He greeted Mao Mao and then left. Mao Mao was there to pick up Quran from school. While Quran was asking the teacher questions, Mao Mao's attention was drawn to a slender building outside with closely spaced pillars, indicating many small rooms inside. The teacher explained that the temple was built by the indigenous people. The Empress Dowager had told her son that one must pass through this temple to rule the land, and only those who chose the correct path could govern. However, the temple had not been used for decades because the previous emperor's brothers had all died of an epidemic, and there was no need to select who would be emperor. The teacher was delighted that someone was interested in the temple. The last interested person was the former royal physician, whom Mao Mao realized must have been her adoptive father. It seemed her adoptive father and the old man might have known each other. In the evening, after Mao Mao tested the emperor and Gyokuyuhi's food for poison and was about to leave, the emperor stopped her. He asked her to accompany him to a place, which turned out to be the temple of choice. Jinshi was also there, and the temple's manager was the teacher from earlier, who spoke quite bluntly to the emperor, asking whom he intended to bring inside. The emperor decided to take Jinshi and Mao Mao. Inside, they saw 3 doors of different colors. A sign warned against entering the red door. The emperor had previously chosen green, so this time he picked blue. Inside were 3 more doors, with a warning against the brown door. The emperor chose green again. They continued this pattern, wandering around the temple. Mao Mao was confused by all the walking. At the last choice, the sign warned against the blue door. The emperor chose yellow, but unfortunately, it led to a dead end. The wall read, "O son of the king, but not of the Empress Dowager." The emperor sighed, realizing he couldn't discern the divine will, just like last time. An old eunuch comforted him, noting that since the temple was sealed in the harem, only he remained as its manager, and the divine will had little meaning. However, Mao Mao's curiosity was piqued. The emperor had followed the signs but hadn't reached the correct answer. Could there be another intention? The old eunuch then remarked that her adoptive father could surely solve this puzzle. Mao Mao's competitive spirit was ignited. She knew her adoptive father's medical knowledge was exceptional. Could the choice also relate to medicine? Suddenly, she recalled the old eunuch's story about the nation's founding. The story focused on the first emperor's mother, the Empress Dowager, and omitted the emperor's father. This suggested that the nation valued maternal lineage but practiced patrilineal succession. Mao Mao asked Jinshi if all the previous emperor's brothers were born of the same mother. The emperor responded that not all were, but the mothers of the princes who bore sons were sisters. Mao Mao then asked the crucial question, whether most emperors had poor eyesight. The emperor confirmed this, noting that the previous emperor had good vision. Mao Mao immediately understood and wanted to go back in, but the old eunuch said she was not qualified as she was neither a consort nor a princess. The emperor jokingly offered to make her his consort, which shocked Jinshi, but it was just a joke. Instead, he let Jinshi take her in. Once inside, they faced the first choice of doors. Like the emperor, Mao Mao chose the blue door, but the second time, she chose aqua. Eventually, they reached the 10th choice, where the hint was to choose the red door. However, there was no red door among the three present. Mao Mao confidently chose green, which surprisingly led to the correct path. Traditionally, a new emperor had to stand there and swear an oath to the people. If no one chose the correct path, a consort who could find it would be brought along. The rightful heir was supposed to make the choice, but Mao Mao figured it out using her intelligence, unrelated to lineage. The emperor asked Mao Mao to explain to everyone. The story said the Empress Dowager could see in the dark. Those chosen by the temple, meaning those with her bloodline, actually could not accurately identify colors. Specifically, they were red-green colorblind. The first choice they faced had blue, red, and green doors, with a warning against the red door. Thus, choosing blue or green was correct, but the Empress Dowager's son would always choose blue, as they couldn't distinguish red from green. The subsequent choices followed a similar logic. If you couldn't tell brown from green, you would use elimination to choose aqua. The last instruction to enter the red door, if one could correctly identify white and purple, would lead one to assume the remaining door was red. Furthermore, those with red-green color blindness typically have excellent night vision, aligning with the Empress Dowager's trait. Thus, only those inheriting her characteristics could pass this test. Originally, the Empress Dowager came from the western regions and settled by marrying the local ruler, making her the nation's ancestress, while maintaining male succession to save face for the local rulers. However, her lineage did not want their bloodline to die out, so they devised a way to continue it. If no princes had her traits, someone from a lineage close to hers would be made a consort, gradually integrating her bloodline into the nation's core. The original rulers were then removed from the story, elevating the Empress Dowager as the progenitor. Once everyone who knew the truth passed away, the revised story became the truth, a peaceful yet lengthy method of changing the dynasty. The old eunuch suggested considering incorporating this clever girl's bloodline to dilute the overly concentrated royal bloodline, but the emperor wasn't interested and didn't want to oppose Mao Mao's adoptive father. Moreover, there were other reasons he hadn't mentioned yet. This discussion also led Mao Mao to start questioning Jinshi's true identity. Mao Mao was surprisingly sent to live in the warehouse because she had scared Sakura into fainting by showing her a gecko's severed tail. After waking up, Sakura complained, fearing that Mao Mao would eventually be expelled from her room by the head maid, Hanyan. Unexpectedly, Mao Mao was very pleased with the idea, as the warehouse was much larger than her current room and offered more privacy. She promptly went to ask Hanyan for permission, which was granted. However, since the incident with Sakura, Mao Mao stopped collecting such things. Rumors about a strange maid laughing while catching bugs were probably about Shisui. To prevent Shisui from affecting others, Mao Mao asked Karan about Shisui's whereabouts. Karan didn't know and asked other maids, who were wary of Mao Mao. She then used a scarf Jinshi had given her as a reward for information about Shisui. The maids, recognizing the scent of the scarf as belonging to a high-ranking official, eagerly provided information. Mao Mao found Shisui in a forest, which also had white arsenic flowers, reminding her of her childhood when she and the courtesan sisters collected these seeds to make abortion drugs. Xin was trying to replace Princess Li Hua without coming into contact with essential oils that could cause miscarriage, yet she used them to make abortion drugs, a contradiction in her behavior. The courtesan women used other common plants like garden balsam and peony, which were readily available in the palace, whereas Shin had to procure materials through traders, showing her lack of medicinal knowledge. Who then had taught her to make the abortion drugs? While pondering this in the forest, Shisui suddenly appeared, and when a bug landed on Mao Mao, Shisui swatted it away. After washing her hair, Shisui shared her findings enthusiastically. They then heard a strange noise and discovered it was the Empress Dowager, who appeared much younger than expected. Shisui told Mao Mao that the Empress Dowager had established the infirmary and had proposed abolishing the eunuch and slave systems. While abolishing slavery was humane, if it meant living like courtesans, the difference was hard to discern. Back in the Pomegranate Palace, Mao Mao was kept busy by Hanyin, especially strict today due to the Empress Dowager's visit. Yokuyuhi seemed to have a good relationship with the Empress Dowager, more like friends despite an age difference. The Empress Dowager, having heard of Mao Mao from a maid at the infirmary, seemed eager to speak with her privately, prompting Gyokuyuhi to find an excuse to leave with the princess. The Empress Dowager acknowledged Mao Mao's resolution of many issues in the palace and asked for her help in investigating whether a curse had been placed on the former emperor. According to rumors Mao Mao heard, the former emperor was a weak ruler and a puppet of the empress. He also had a preference for young girls, frequently marrying young brides. The Empress Dowager has a scar on her abdomen from when she had to have a cesarean section because her body was not fully developed when giving birth to the current emperor. Mao Mao's foster father had undergone castration surgery specifically to assist the Empress Dowager during childbirth. Fortunately, the current emperor grew up healthy, and the Empress Dowager later successfully gave birth to another prince, who was only a year older than Mao Mao and much younger than his elder brother. Mao Mao dared not ponder whether this younger brother was truly the son of the former emperor. A few days later, the Empress Dowager hosted a gathering for the 4 senior consorts. Gyokuyuhi's pregnancy was an open secret. However, such face-to-face tea parties could be opportunities for probing for information, most likely by Consort Lulan. Aside from her overly lavish attire, there seemed to be no rumors about Consort Lulan. At that moment, Mao Mao was called away by Hanyin, who told her that her services for testing poison were not needed today, as the Empress Dowager needed her help with something else. Naturally, Hanyin did not inquire about the details, but reminded Mao Mao not to do anything that would betray Gyokuyuhi. Mao Mao, frightened by being cornered, quickly assured that she did not want to become Hanyin's enemy, and then went to find the maid arranged by the Empress Dowager. The place was a former part of the palace, no longer in use, but still immaculately clean, with a beautifully maintained courtyard. The maid led Mao Mao to a room that was off limits to everyone, which emitted a strange smell upon opening. During the reign of the emperor 2 generations back, this room was occupied by a palace maid who became a junior consort. It was the empress's room and the room where the former emperor was conceived and also died. The maid then closed the door and took Mao Mao to another room to talk. She told Mao Mao that in his later years, the former emperor often stayed in that room with his mother, known as the Empress, as if immersed in memories. After the Empress died, the emperor also passed away in that same room, although given his age, it could be considered a natural death. However, the Empress Dowager always felt she had cursed him because she wished for his death every night. Moreover, after the emperor's death, his body was placed in the ancestral temple for a year as per tradition and showed no signs of decay when buried the following year, looking as if he had just passed away. In contrast, the body of the Empress, who died around the same time, had decomposed beyond recognition. Thus, the Empress Dowager believed she had cursed the former emperor. The building was soon to be demolished, and the Empress Dowager hoped Mao Mao could investigate before then. Mao Mao agreed immediately and then made her own request.